the Department of Accounting and General Services present their biennial budget to the committees. Good morning.
Morning. Morning, Chair Del Cruz, members of the committee, and Chair Moriwaki, and I guess the rest of your committee virtually for GVO. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. My name is Kurt Otaguro, State Comptroller and Director of Accounting and General Services, also affectionately known as DAGS. I hope all of you had a pleasant holiday season and a new year.
Thank you.
Joining me today virtually are our DAGS administrators and directors. DAGS is comprised of 8 divisions, 3 support offices, 3 district island managers on Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii, and 8 attached agencies. In the interest of time, I will ask each of them to introduce themselves, either if you're called for questioning, or I can just name them right now. What would be your preference? Up to you. So we'll have them turn on their videos when called upon. So Chair De La Cruz and Moriwaki, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks for your continued support and guidance throughout this past year. And what a year, what a difference 1 year makes. This year was like no other. The impact of COVID-19 created a global pandemic and forced everyone to reevaluate our priorities. The COVID-19 pandemic is a game changer, and it has changed our lives. As you all know, we have serious challenges ahead, and now is the time to come together and work together collaboratively. We need swift and decisive actions that will make a difference for the people of Hawaii and for our employees. This will require critical thinking and doing things differently, and sometimes non-traditionally. DAGS was put to the test in 2020, managing and taking care of 79 state facilities. Everyone had high expectations, which required the staff to take accountability and individual leadership. Together, we collectively made decisions, sometimes without having the benefit of prior administrative rules and guidance. We had to be flexible. The pandemic changed our operating structure and employee-written job descriptions. We learned that each circumstance had to be addressed individually with sensitivity. The pandemic hampered many businesses and people's livelihood in our state, but it also forced the state of Hawaii to think and do things differently. It caused all of us to collaborate together to address a single challenge, containing the virus. While I'm proud of all of my colleagues and their state employees, I'm especially proud of our DAGS employees' performance. They never stopped working throughout this entire pandemic and will continue to do the same. Many employees became more productive through teleworking. Our DAGS maintenance and janitorial staff maintained their proficiency by performing their daily duties and maintaining all of our buildings by showing up to work. We depended on the Department of Health guidance as well as the ever-evolving CDC guidance to keep our facilities clean and operational. We started the year with fresh new ambitions, but we quickly had to adjust our operations to comply with health and safety practices. This pandemic caused or created an opportunity for all of us at the state to work together across jurisdictions. A good example of this was the pooling of resources quickly to establish a satellite unemployment operation at the convention center. Thanks to the combined leadership with the Senate, as well as the House and the executive branches, we successfully built a second UI processing center operation over a single weekend. That's the power of collaboration. Internally, DAGS Accounting modified their internal operating procedures to accommodate teleworking operations to support the other state agencies. That effort resulted in the acceleration through digitized forms and enabling more documents and processes to leverage the state's e-signing system. We completed the 2020 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, known as CAFR, on time. This consolidates, the CAFR consolidates all the state's financials as of June 30th, 2020. This report is used to highlight creditworthiness and financial strength of the state of Hawaii. I'd like to thank all the state agencies and their counterparts for their cooperation to complete the CAFR on time. And special thanks to State Auditor Les Kondo and Lauren Kawajiri for their support and guidance. In DAG's Public Works, they continued their construction management support with the new state-of-the-art Hawai'i State Hospital in Kaneohe. The 144-bed facility is expected to be completed and turned over to the Department of Health on time in early February of this year. DAG's Public Works also accomplished major milestones with the successful issuance of an RFQ, a request for qualifications, for the new stadium development at Halavo. We also selected the top 3 bidders. The project continues to progress, and thanks to the legislature for providing additional guidance and support throughout this process. Public Works has also received, will work closely with the Department of Public Safety and receive approval from the City and County of Honolulu for a plan review use, a PRU permit that approved a 5-year master plan that will provide the construction and relocation of a new OCCC facility should that come to bear. While there's much to do in the relocation, this was a critical step forward. Our DAG's leasing branch also worked hard to eliminate operating or office leases from various agencies and brought them back into state facilities or just canceled the leases. That resulted already in a $500,000 reduction to annual budgets on the general fund side. I would like to note that the Office of the Auditor recently published a limited scope review report on December 29th of last year. Auditor approached me during the pandemic over the first 2 months and offered his assistance to review our procedures and protocols. Naturally, we embraced his expertise and policies, as policies and conditions had to be were evolving and had to be revised. We were all learning about how to deal with the virus. And I will be the first to admit that I didn't know all the answers. However, I did instruct our staff at DAGS that my immediate priority was to respond quickly during the emergencies and, of course, get the results. I personally asked the janitors to do their very best and keep with the resources that we had. I'm pleased to say that they responded. According to the limited scope review report, it covered 43 facilities statewide and 23 on Oahu. These facilities are home to over 6,000 employees, state employees. 87% reside on Oahu. Over the 10 months since the pandemic was announced, the number of cases reported at a DAGS managed state facility was less than 0.5%. Thankfully, no community spread occurred in any of our offices. A good example is the due diligence of our Kauai district manager. There was not a single case reported at a state facility. That takes proactive leadership and actionable steps. When DAGS was notified of a positive COVID case, we immediately contracted with local companies who responded sometimes within hours to address the disinfectant, depending on the concern of the department. Again, just being flexible and being able to respond. I'm proud of the staff as they all stepped up, and many were behind the scenes and continue to be behind the scenes as we continue on with the state's operations. It's humbling to see how dedicated our people really are in times of challenge and in times of need. The maintenance, janitorial staff, they never stop working. I appreciate that, and I want to thank them publicly. DAG's mission is still to attain maximum value for the state taxpayers by providing physical, financial, and technical infrastructure support for the state departments and agencies. We're a central agency. Our emphasis will be and will continue to be to strive and be as responsive to meet our service objectives. Looking ahead to the next fiscal year, I look forward to working with everyone to find actionable solutions to address both the healthy and safety concerns as well as our fiscal issues that we have in front of us. But we have to do this as one. Projects need to be prioritized so that resources, the limited resources that we have, can be assigned and maximized to be applied effectively. More importantly, we need to hold our teams accountable to achieve the end result within the timeframes and the budgets that we set. Governor Ige has asked some of us in his cabinet to work closely with other governors and the private sector to come up with a working action plan. This will involve changing processes, consultation with unions, and possibly some legislative modifications. I'm positive we can do this as a state, and I'm positive that as long as we work together, we can demonstrate much to the public and the state of Hawaii. For our budget request for our fiscal year 21 to 23, the biennium budget, we carefully deliberated and prioritized all of our requests based on the best value to the state. Resources needed were balanced with less FTE funding to adequately provide services at acceptable levels. As I mentioned, DAGS has approximately 27 programs under its financial and operational oversight. I would like the opportunity to highlight just a few major budget requests for your consideration, and then my team can answer any questions, detailed questions you may have regarding our request. On the operating budget, base budget, for the first year of the biennium, our adjusted base budget will be $189.6 million. In the second year, $179.8 million, or a $9.8 million net reduction. In fiscal year, second year, it will be $189.3 million, or on an adjusted basis, $176 million, or a $13.3 million net reduction. On the full-time equivalents, the FTEs, the positions, we started 2019 year with 855 and a half positions. In our first year of the biennium, the FTE count will go down to 688 positions, with a caveat that I'll explain in a second. That's a 19% reduction. In the second year of the biennium, it'll be 684 positions. Of note, in our request for full-time equivalents or positions, one of our requests is for the legislature to consider allowing us to transfer 88 positions in public works who work on specifically on projects to be funded instead of from general funds to the CIP fund, bond fund. Additionally, on the enterprise technology services side, we have 10 positions that are dedicated to development of technology, and we'd like those staff to also be converted to CIP. So the net reduction would be 73 FTEs from the DAG's overall position count and 8.5% elimination, leaving remaining 782 people to continue to do the work at DAGS. Under Act 9, you know that we defunded 108 positions, but in our request, we are asking for 42.2 positions being retained with funding that we do have. On the program review side, working with Budget and Finance and the Governor's Office, DAGS identified $11.6 million in general fund reductions for the first year and $11.7 million in general fund reductions for the second year. That's 39% retention to keep central operations going. On the CIP project front, our request for the first biennium year is $72.9 million, and I'll direct that and explain part of it. And the second year is $30.1 million. Of the $72.9 million request in 2022, $11.4 million represents that shifting of position funding from general fund to CIP. That would represent approximately 90 positions in 2022, and permanent positions, and another 11 temporary positions. That represents approximately 14% of our total FTEs. On the operating side, significant highlights in our budget are a request for consideration of $2.587 million in operating funds for the Aloha Stadium. As you know, the operating deficit continues to plague the stadium because of the lack of large events and lack of revenue generation within the bowl, the stadium itself. The stadium has been depleting its special funds. They've been very proactive and innovative in leveraging the parking structure of the parking lot to continue the swap meet operations having special events during Halloween and Christmas, and that will continue to happen as the restrictions continue throughout the state. The Stadium Authority is also requesting $300,000 for a structural study that will be required to ensure the health and safety of our aging stadium. On the larger request is really for this facility at the state capitol. DAGS is committed to support and continue to maintain this facility, which is over 50 years of age. The capital pools continues to be a challenge, and so we've asked for $30 million over 2 years, so $17.5 million for the first biennium year and $12.5 million for the second biennium year. Why is that important? As you know, we have the architecture structure of the Capitol is unique. It has the water pool feature, but over 50 years we've suffered severe cracks. We've recently drained one half of the ponds, as you know, to look at the floor. In that process, we also took advantage to replace some of the soffits on that side, which have been rusting. And so what we've uncovered are hairline cracks that continue to plague the basement. Even today, I went down to the basement Monday and saw additional issues because of the salt buildup that's happening from the draining of the pool. And so through the hairline cracks, it's difficult now to determine where it's going. Unfortunately, the side of the pool that we drained was on the Senate side. And so the basement continues to be a challenge, and it's starting to have issues, and it already ruined our new carpet. And so that's something that we need to take a look at. We're also going to contemplate different things on a short-term basis to see if we can seal the entire pool. That will obviously have a lot of costs, but that's a short-term fix if we can't figure out how to repair the damages that are being caused. The last request that I'd like to highlight is really more on technology. Doug Murdoch, our state CIO, has indicated to me, and we've known this for a while, that our data center at Kalani Moku is outdated and inefficient. And to upgrade that facility would take a lot in terms of increase uninterrupted power supplies, UPSs, things like that. And so he's already taken initiatives to do things like outsourcing mainframe as a service for backup. We're relying on data, and should Kalani Moku go down, we need a reliable source to recover. And so he's already done that and moved a second site in the mainland, in Colorado, I believe, or Omaha, I can't remember. Maybe we can ask him. But that helps to negate the need for a data center. And so what he's proposing is to move a data center to Mililani, possibly in a container. I wouldn't call it mobile, but you can do this nowadays, and CIO can explain further. And that also gives us the opportunity to consolidate other data centers throughout the state, should they wish to do that. And it also provides needed space in the Kalani Moku basement that we could repurpose to continue our efforts to reduce office lease expenses. And so we think that's a good initiative that will serve the state well over the long term. I'd like to add my special thanks to DAG's leadership, especially my administrative services team, Mei-Ling Silliman, Miyoki Ng, and Cassie Toyofuku, for their hard work in preparing this biennial budget. We're happy to answer any questions, detailed questions that you have from you or your committee, and of any material that we submitted. On behalf of Deputy Comptroller Audrey Hidana and myself, thank you for your consideration and the opportunity to present our budget this year.
Do you remember his question? Senator Marwah.
Hi, thank you very much for that. I appreciate the amount of work that you've done, and to really look at it more innovatively in terms of being a service agency rather than a control agency. So I thank you for that and your staff. I do want to highlight some of the questions that I have in terms of your budgeting, how you said that you went from your divisions or your branches up to identify where the cuts should be made, because you made some extensive cuts. You've made some transfers to special funds, to CIP, and in order to maintain the kinds of services that we need. I especially looked at central services and what you're doing in terms of the 66 buildings you have. How are you managing that? Because, with COVID now and the auditor's report, how are you managing your different divisions with the lessened staff as well as the
One
cuts?
question at a time.
Okay. Okay. So can you tell us how you have shifted over to various funds to be able to still manage the services, or what services are you cutting to the public?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I guess when we looked at the budget, we were asked to look at a 10% cut, a 15% reduction, and a 20% reduction. I'm a firm believer that we can always do better, and we can always reduce expense, and we can also always re-engineer ourselves to address the needs. But we also have to prioritize what we do. In a 10% reduction, it would be sore, it would be a little painful, but the staff felt that they could get by if we worked together and do things differently. At a 15% reduction, it starts to hurt a lot more. And obviously, if a 20% reduction were to be done at DAGs, that would require actually some severe action, which would mean closing of programs and actually reducing positions, which is what we tried to avoid. While DAGs is only 1.3% of the general fund, the entire general fund, we did look at what's the primary mission. So accounting and general services. Obviously, in accounting, that operation has to continue. With the state's budget at over $15 billion now, we have to process that. When the $863 million came from the federal government for the CARES Act, we have to process all that. And we have to process it quickly. So we did not want to sacrifice certain operations like that. A second, obviously, is in payroll. We have to pay our employees. We have over 63,000 employees at any given time. It fluctuates. And at one time, before the reductions, it was a $300 million a month expense to the state. We have to pay, and we have to pay on time every 2 weeks. So in payroll, we have suffered some vacancies, and so we did ask the governor if we could fill those mission-critical positions. In what you referenced on central services would be another area where I feel it's critical. So we have multiple functions within central services that probably the administrator can explain, but the one that is near and dear to most of our employees is our maintenance, our janitorial staff, because they're the ones that are taking care of all of you on a daily basis. And so unfortunately, over the years, their level of service will continue to be done daily. They may not be able to pick up the rubbish every day in certain buildings. What the janitors told me is, I told them for the state capitol as an example, okay, everybody's not here, so let's reduce the number of times we maintain the floors. And their answer to me was actually surprising but heartwarming. They said no. If they stop servicing the restroom facilities in this building and not do what they're doing on a daily basis, to come back and to get it to that level of standard and expectation is going to take a lot more effort. And so they would prefer to continue to do what they're doing regardless of if people were in the building or not. And so the janitorial staff was there. We are asking to fill some of these positions. Obviously, it's the easiest one to not fill, but they're the lowest paying jobs, or not the lower end of the spectrum compared to an engineer, I should say, not the less important. And so we looked at those kind of operations. On the flip side, we see other things, whether it's in, and maybe the administrators will not appreciate why I say this, but there are other functions that we have in DAGs that are less critical on a daily basis, like maybe it's in audit, or maybe it's state archives, or maybe it's in land survey. Every mission is important because we serve our customers, which are state departments. But in terms of what is critical, it was really in accounting and in janitorial staff. In repair and maintenance and central services, that has unfortunately taken a lesser degree. We've worked as best we can with the resources that we have for engineers and building managers to fix repair and maintenance type of things, repairs and alterations. But we've slowed down a bit. They still continue to process the work orders as they come in, especially on the neighbor islands, but they may not get to it as quickly. Some were restriction related, like the island of Lanai, we couldn't get there. And so I believe the district manager told me there's 37 or so items that he gotta fix soon, if he can get there.
I guess I get back to your mission. If you look at your statute 26.6, have you, with your managers, looked at that and say, some of these things, like pre-audits, if you're going to do things faster, are in the law, and part of that is how can you streamline what you do so that it is faster service, more responsive service, but also, as you say, doing for the public and doing the payroll, for example, for our employees. What kinds of things have you looked at so that we can, in fact, have a much more responsive? I mean, you're doing a good job, but in terms of looking at how we might help you do your jobs better, and in terms of
Thank
what
you
we
for
require of you.
Senator, thank you for saying that, because thanks to the legislature last year for approving the new accounting system, the financial modernization system. That is going to be a game changer for the state, for the executive branch. And when you mention functions like pre-audit, as an example, because the system that we have is over 45 years old and it's mainframe based. Back then, the design of a system was really the process. It wasn't for data, and it wasn't to do analysis, and it was straightforward. But over the years, as you know, because processes can be taken advantage of, errors can occur, more manual processes and functions became into the state, like pre-audit. So you're checking up front. You're checking the work instead of after the fact up front, and that slows down the process. But it's a manual review to make sure that there's funding in an account. Things that in today's modernization systems that we see, all of that is behind the scenes. Much of the controls and the procedures that we do today manually will be already within the system that we purchase. And we hope to purchase a system that resides in the cloud. And so it's setting based. And so I mentioned this before, that today the employee has to work for the system. They have to be trained, they have to remember, and they cannot make a mistake. And then there's somebody that double check up front, and there's somebody that double check in the back. In tomorrow's system, as we find our financial management partners, the system will work for the employees. The settings and all the decision-making, much of the logic, not everything, but much of the logic that is we do today manually will be already embedded in the system. And we predefine that, we program it into the system through settings, and then we do it. And so we have no question when something comes in whether they're making the right choice or not, because the system will help them to make that choice.
So are there statutory requirements that are not necessary because the system is already gauged to do that? And so perhaps by eliminating it and putting something much more efficient into law, that we might help you in future generations?
Yes, and so we'll be working with the unions, and we do have to change job descriptions. We need to change the kind of person that we want to hire. The critical thinking is still there, but the skill level will change. And so I actually embrace that, because I believe that employees want to do more. They don't want to just process it past paper and make copies. And so that's the exciting part of what we're going to be embarking on.
Thank you. I do have a question on central services because of the auditor's report. You can go back to that. You said that they...
Mary, did you have a question on the same subject?
No, I have questions on different areas.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I can wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so on central services, that was a concern because of the auditor's report, and we do have the 66 buildings, and we are in the mode of we want to make the buildings safe and secure and healthy. What have you done, or what has central services done to look at the auditor's report and the recommendations, particularly on checklist and making sure that the buildings are sanitized and healthy?
we've addressed the audit report or the informal scope, limited scope review report with both the Oahu Central Services Manager as well as the 3 district managers. So you should first know that Central Services is really, the report only covers Oahu. So maybe what I will ask is that the Central Service Administrator can address your question directly. So if Dean Shimamura could go on video and address the Senator's question.
Is it on his side or our side?
His side, R2D2.
Dean, can you speak up again? You're breaking up.
Can you put himself on the camera too?
Hear me now.
Yeah, and put yourself on camera.
It's on.
Yeah, we have problems.
So you know what, we'll call a short recess so we can try to work out technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Recess. the meeting back to order. So if you want to prep
Yes.
Dean before you start.
So with regard to answering Senator Moriaki's question, I'd like to call on our Central Services Administrator, Dean Shimomura, to address the question regarding the report that was issued by the Office of the Auditor. So what are we doing, what have we done and what are we doing with regard to the questions and the issues that auditor has raised?
Dean, you can go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, chairs, vice chair, and members of the committee. Dean Shimomura with the administrator for the DAG Central Services. When the pandemic first started, we took a look at our operations and the way that we have traditionally operated all of our buildings is that, as it was mentioned in the report, we do have like a landlord-tenant type relationship with all the occupants. In all of our buildings on Oahu, probably around 90% or maybe even more of the occupants in the buildings are non-DAGs. So our buildings are occupied by other departments, Department of Tax, Department of Labor, even the state capitol, whatnot. And in many of our buildings, the only DAG staff in the buildings are janitors. So when we looked at our buildings, like I said, since we have like a landlord-tenant relationship, the way that we have traditionally operated is that we don't have control or we don't tell other programs how to do their jobs, how they are to operate. So we continued that way throughout the pandemic where DAGs took responsibility for the common areas of the buildings and left responsibility of the office spaces and assigned spaces to the programs that are in them. So we had to kind of do that also because we had to look at our budget and whatnot, and the resources that we have. So, you know, if we had an unlimited budget, if we had unlimited resources and staff, you know, we would have loved to be able to, you know, buy hand sanitizer for everybody, buy masks for everybody, and whatnot. But that wasn't possible. So we try to keep it in line with how we've traditionally worked with our buildings. And, you know, so we had to really coordinate a lot with the occupants on how they will be operating so that we can coordinate between the occupants of a building and also make sure that we provide the support that they need for the common areas and the services on, you know, opening the building, locking up the building, and whatnot.
I think the concern was not having some standards, so, and not providing at least the supplies for your custodial staff to clean at least the common areas. And when I look at your budget, it's like $19 million, so I question what the 19 million, it couldn't all be payroll for 116 people.
Okay, so.
So, you know, how is that money being used?
Okay, when you look at our budget, when you look at our budget, we have about 4 to 5 million is in salaries. We have 101 positions, so about 4 to 5 million is for salaries. And out of that budget, about 10 million of it is for utilities. We pay for electricity, water, sewer, and other utilities. Also within that budget, we pay for maintenance contractors. So we have 3 contracts to maintain the HVAC systems on the Oahu buildings. We have an elevator maintenance contract, or we have 4 elevator maintenance contracts that actually go statewide. We have to maintain generators and pumps and whatnot. Those are all contracted out. So what's left for supplies is actually a lot smaller than what the entire budget is. And when we looked at, when the pandemic started, I had made the decision that we wanted to stick to CDC and Department of Health guidelines. And because we recognize that we're not the experts in this field, so we want to rely on who we consider were the experts in the field. And when I looked at the CDC guidelines that were put out at that time, we realized that there was really no additional training needed for the staff, because the way that they were doing the cleaning, their everyday cleaning is actually what was needed to be done. It's just that we would have to change the frequency and how often they wipe down high touch surface areas. And when we looked at the products that we had, the products that we already use were EPA disinfectants. So there was really no additional training, and we didn't have to find additional products, because we just ended up purchasing more of the products that we already used.
I guess the question is, the end point is, as the comptroller said, is, are the buildings safe? Are they healthy? Are the high-touch areas and the common areas clean? And if you don't have the supplies or the money in the supplies, if in fact most of your tenants are non-DAGS tenants, are they paying you anything, or how does that work? Because it seems to be the end point is the public uses the buildings a lot.
The current model is that a tenant does not pay rent, obviously. There's no CAM, there's no operating expense, right? So when you're in a DAGS facility, the expense will be borne in DAGS. Now, within their department itself, the office, that's what they fund. And so we will take another look at it. This is a little dated, but on Oahu, the managed facilities, there are 30 of them. There's 77 FTEs or janitors that Dean has for those buildings. At some point in time, when I can't remember what date we did this, but 69 were filled, so about 8 were vacant, so about 10%. Those 30 buildings represent about almost 2.48 million square feet. So when you divide the number of square feet per person, per janitor to clean, including the public areas, that's where the prioritization comes in. And so for the state capital, for example, I know for a fact that they will wipe down the elevators more than once a day if possible. Now, can they get to every single part of this room? I don't think so. But they will get to the restrooms. So the janitors themselves know their buildings, and that's some of the difficult part in when the Office of the Auditor was reviewing things, without having the benefit of understanding a building itself and usage. To look at documentation is one thing, but to see the building and how it needs to be cared for and the frequency is a different story. So, Dean has done this where, how many square feet per person and how many can they do. The other thing, as we talked about, Senator, is the geographical side. So while we are fortunate in this building to have 5 custodians that take care of this building, they just walk up and down and they're actually per floor. In other facilities, they got to drive. And on the neighbor islands especially, it gets difficult, right? If you're covering the north side of the Big Island, that's a long drive. So there's a lot of time involved in transporting from one building to the next, which takes time, and that lessens the effectiveness. And so how we do that going forward is something we got to really take a hard look at and work with the departments to see what we can collaborate with. We were fortunate, you're talking about expenses, because he didn't have that much in supplies to facilitate all of the buildings. We were able to get about a little under 400 some odd thousand in PPE money for hand sanitizer stations that we will put into, we just got it, and we're deploying it as we speak. And so those are the kind of things that the more stations we have for the public when they return, or if they're here, the better risk mitigations there are. So there's no one answer, but in answer to your question, I firmly believe that our janitors are wiping down as best they can the public areas.
Okay, well, some of these things, though, we could probably do in subject matter.
Yeah.
Similar to Dean,
Yeah, go ahead.
just one question, and I have others for different sectors. Okay, before I forward my question to Dean, I just want to congratulate DAGS for, as you mentioned, the COVID situation, I know the expenses went beyond whatever you had, but you guys did a good job with setting up this Capitol in all the rooms with all the plexiglass and stuff that you had to do. You know, to me, I think
No,
that,
that was
Sergeant at
internal.
Arms.
oh, Sergeant at Arms, okay, but they helped, right? DEGs were involved
and
with the
that's a
purchase.
collaboration
Okay,
between,
but anyway, the
Sergeant
question is,
It's Sergeant of Arms.
okay,
Yeah, most
the
of
question
Sergeant.
is the consolidation of offices, and I think you mentioned that earlier. One question I have, you know, the public safety was moved from one office in one of the buildings down to the Alakea Street, where PSD is on Alakea. So you moved that group over there. My understanding is that when the move was made, all of those that were at the original office did not fit into the office building on Alakea. So I understand they're all crammed, and and this came from the employees that were moved from that building to Alakea Street. So just a comment if you have plans on moving them to another area. But I also noticed that you did say that IT office in Kalanipu'u,
Kanimoku.
Kalani will be available, so, and you're right next to each other. I was wondering if you're thinking about putting some of those people in, because I understand it's overcrowded on Alakea for public safety.
Right, Senator, and thanks for raising that. There has been a long-term plan to move public safety from the OHA building, or the former AFIS building on Ala Moana Boulevard
Right.
Ward, and relocate them because their lease is up. And so with the former director and now current, we have a plan to move all of them from that facility to save them the rent to Keoneana, which has been vacated because of the move for ETS to move years ago. So that building is ready. They are starting to move in. So more of PSD will be moving in. It is not exactly a one-for-one split. So yeah, we worked with the prior administration to get them in there. So some people will have less space that they're used to. And it's unfortunate, but we can address anything that they feel is unsafe and look at it case by case. But that
Okay.
will reduce expenses to public
Okay.
safety.
Yeah,
Senator Kidani?
thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank DAGS for the great job that they do in the state capitol building. I appreciate the custodians and their diligence, and I know it's a difficult building to keep up with, when we are open with the number of public that is in there. My one comment would be that I know you guys have attempted to cut down costs by using less expensive hand towels, but whatever you're using now is so thin, most people will take 2 or 3 pieces, so it's not working. And I think you guys should readdress that. Thank you.
Noted.
Okay, you have other questions?
Yeah, but budget?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, all right. Can you explain when you're planning on doing the transfers, like in Public Works? I think you mentioned the 89 positions, including 73. You're transferring it from general fund to CIPs. So how does that work? Does that mean that they will be under a budget on your CIP project for their, I guess, salaries and everything?
Yes,
So how does that work?
it's a practice that has been done in the past. In fact, Public Works used to be CIP funded. I realize that fiscally,
It's not.
and then they moved, and then the legislature moved them back to
Yeah.
general fund.
I see.
And I
see.
realize that's kicking the can down the road. You don't want to pay for people's salaries today over.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what happens when the project is done, though?
Right,
So what happens to
yeah.
the
No, so-
personnel?
Nothing, because they're paid for with operating dollars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But they're shifting it to CIP.
So
But
we-
they're
we're
shifting it
requesting
to
for a
CIPs.
temporary, at least through this, no more than 4 years, right, is what we were projecting, to move it and shift it so that we could alleviate some pressure from the general fund. That's all that was.
Yeah, because it's general funded positions. So does
That's
the
a big,
CIP?
no,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a big policy call. No, so we,
Yeah.
so throughout the years, it's just gone back and forth.
Oh,
And
okay.
it
Okay.
hasn't affected the employee.
Oh, okay,
Right.
that's the question
The
I
employee still
have,
gets
is
paid.
what happens to the employee after the project is done on CIP? So do they go back to the A funds then?
No, and not
general
only,
fund?
if it, for the longest time when it was kept on CIP, they would just work on other projects.
Right.
Oh,
There are
okay,
There's
more
always
projects.
CIP
okay, okay,
projects.
There
okay.
are-
It's
yeah.
not like you're only hired to work on one building, and then when the building is done, you're gone.
Right,
That's
that's,
like a contractor.
okay, that's
Yes.
the question I have, what's the process?
So
Anyway.
is that a policy call then, that,
Yeah, so we have to review it. I mean, it's
Whether
interesting that the
CIP
governor's pushing that, but normally we've actually reduced the amount of positions on CIP.
Yes.
Does Senator Kidani, you had a question?
Oh.
You have to unmute. Unmute.
unmute?
And I only have
Unmute.
one more after, Chair, just one more after.
I wanted to follow up if there was still an active civic center project. Years ago, it's been over 10 years since I last heard that they were looking at how to modernize the area around the Capitol building and Washington Place and Kalanimoku. Is that still an ongoing project?
Thank you for the question. I think, Senator, you're referring to the Capital District Master Plan that was done years ago. And I can have, if I may ask, Chris Kinimaka, our Public Works Administrator, to answer that question. Chris?
Thank you.
Good morning, chairs, vice
Good morning.
chairs,
Happy New Year.
you and committee member. Senator Kidani, for our Capital District Master Plan, we do have our space calculations underway. We have our procedures to determine what the needs are for the state capital district. If we were to go ahead and try to consolidate and provide enough state space to get all of the offices out of rental space. But the effort right now to actually put that into motion is on hold because of the budget constraints that we have. We do have studies to look at the different options that we're working on, which includes renovating our facilities and working with other agencies like HHFDC for our Liliha Civic Center, for example. We're looking at mixed-use production there so we can have offices and housing and programs to see how we can best utilize all of our funding and our efforts to leverage program services and better the community. We are also working with our consultants to look at ways to possibly purchase buildings in our civic centers statewide to see if that's more cost effective than renovating facilities. So a lot of research, a lot of planning going on right now, but nothing active except for example, the Liliha Civic Center. We also working very diligently on Waihoa Civic Center, and we have efforts at Kahului and Wailuku Civic Center. All of those working on the counties and other state agencies collaboratively to bring the most that we can, the funding that we have. But for the master plan for the capital district, that is currently on hold, and we're researching our options.
Thank you for that. I think in our visits to Department of Health, our COVID-19 committee visited, and again, I was reminded of how cramped and not feasible their quarters are, as well as the Department of Education, the building, and it's on a great big space that is not totally used and in the center of a really great location. So I think, as soon as we can, we should look at using that to go up and build the space that we need for our state agencies to move into one place. Thank you.
One more question, and I'm done. Can I ask for the procurement AGS 240? Sarah Allen is gone. Is that under your responsibility to fill the vacancy as well, the appointment?
Yes, State Procurement Office is an attached agency of DAGS, and so Sarah Allen has moved on. And so we are appointing Bonnie Kalkui, who has been there, the Assistant Administrator, to serve as a temporary assignment to be acting State Procurement Officer for the state.
Oh, okay, so there's somebody in there right now then?
Yes, Bonnie has been with the state for many
Yes,
years
I
and very
understand.
experienced.
Okay, good, thanks. Okay, that's it.
I wanted to go over the enterprise technology office. You know, it looks like a number of cuts, whether you're putting it into CIP or you're putting it into special funds, I'm not sure, or transferring costs. Can you explain that? Because it seems to me, as we learned from the pandemic, we're going to be highly reliant on technology and digitizing. That could you explain what the cuts are and the impacts of those cuts?
Sure. I'll ask on State Chief Information Officer Doug Murdoch to address Senator's question.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the committee, Chair.
Morning.
Morning.
The move of our program office that's doing our ERP modernization from general fund to capital funds won't have any impact. It's the same number of people. It's a good investment to do it that way. Those people, are 100% dedicated to CIP-funded projects. The next one being financial modernization system to replace Amos. So there's no impact from that. We lost a lot of positions or defunded a lot of positions last year. I was trying to do some reform and reorganization of ETS to try and modernize us, to help modernize the state faster. So we had a lot of positions defunded, and if we lose those, it will slow down the ability of the state to modernize. Other cuts that are there, is accepting risk based on the state's current funding profile. But everything at this point, IT is the state's nervous system. We hardly get anything done without IT, and I think IT is the best hope for modernizing the state and being able to do things better and faster. So fewer cuts is better, but we understand the situation.
So all the contracts are in place that you have, especially, for example, UI or DHS. These are all in place, and there's no interruption with services as they try to modernize.
Right now, there's no interruption in services for those projects, but I think we have to be very careful that, if we go to furloughs or we cut people or positions, they won't be able to staff the government side of a project. So anytime we do a big modernization project, we need state workers working with the contractor to help them understand what the business process is and what our technology needs are. And if they're not available to work with a contractor, then we're risking or wasting our investment in the project. So we need to make sure that we continue to staff the state side of any modernization project. So that's the biggest risk right now. But generally, our key modernization projects are funded right now.
So is the ICSD part of your enterprise services office, or because I see some budget requests for that? Can you explain that, a connection between your office?
The IT steering committee, ITSC.
I saw, hold on. I saw the request in comptroller's testimony.
Are you talking about the radio towers?
The communications, yeah.
Communication, yeah.
Is that all under
That's part of
ETS?
ETS, and that's.
And what is the relationship between that and providing services? Because you're making some requests for that.
Yes, so while it's under ETS, Public Works, Chris Kinimaka and her staff work closely with the ETS staff to provide, to
'Cause they don't
ensure
do
that
the
yeah,
Okay, so this is for ICSD.
right, to maintain the radio network that first responders use across the state,
okay.
on all islands.
So Chris will have to be in charge of getting it built.
Yeah,
Because
there are
Doug doesn't
towers,
have-
there's connections.
Doug doesn't have that kind of capability.
But we should probably stop calling it ICSD because
That was the old
ETS for those duties when ICSD was essentially.
Probably a structure
brought-
change we
Yeah,
can make.
so that's kind of confusing because that's what it was, what you were called before, right? ICSD? or,
That's right. ICSD and YMT
Yeah.
are merged to create ETS. The state ETS runs the state's emergency radio.
Okay, I had a
Okay.
question about table 14. AGS 131. So how is that gonna, you guys, you know, with the seawater air conditioning, all those items have been deleted from the budget?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we got notification from Honolulu Seawater Company that they were closing down operation last month. After how many years of trying to make a go at it, the expenses were too high for them to continue operation. The Central Services Division with Public Works were working with them. Their promise was to deliver cold water to this building, all buildings that we negotiate with by the end of this year, which hasn't happened. And so the contract, though, that the state did execute many years ago, my compliments to them, it required the state to put no money up front. And so we've deleted all of the budget requests, any expense associated with that project out of the budget. Should not be in there.
Wasn't it about $6 million initially?
I don't know.
Yeah,
about
whatever it
initially,
is. But I think they didn't have enough clients yet.
They had a combination of states and some private
They
sectors in
probably didn't have
downtown.
enough capital to build it out.
As
And
well.
then the permitting probably.
and the permitting took so long.
Yeah, they said that they had most of it. They had a new infusion of a mainland company to come in and put more capital in it, but their business model, I believe, was challenged. And so we questioned them on some of the revenue streams going forward, not necessarily to build it, but to maintain it. And then, of course, they had one fatal flaw with regard to how they were going to run the cold water through downtown to this building and actually across the street in Baratania, which we didn't
Big bucks.
appreciate. Yeah.
So,
Infrastructure.
Table 16, I noticed you have nothing on it. Is it because as part of the emergency proclamation, the lapse date of many projects got extended?
You know, that's a good question. I asked Mei Ling Silliman from our ASO to do that. I believe so, but yeah.
So what, because all departments were able to extend the lapse date, or?
No, not
Just
across
you.
the board, not across the board. This was request.
Because
by request.
you ultimately decide
Right,
what's gonna lapse and what doesn't,
right,
right?
by project, so we decide. But I don't know if it was a policy decision across the board. Mei Ling, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, there are no CIP appropriations that are lapsing. So all these CIP appropriations that we currently have are either extended or the funds have been.
Okay, extended till when?
It depends. If the funds are extended, then it can conceivably go on until expense.
Should have dollar value.
No, so I had thought that because of COVID, DAGS had, one of the powers was to extend the lapse date on certain projects to help get construction moving.
Correct.
Yeah, upon
So
request.
if you have a CIP appropriation and the funds are encumbered, then it can go on until no longer needed. Then there is the requirement for you to request for approval to extend it if it's past, I believe it's 5 years. I have to check with,
Okay, so so instead of the normal 3 years or 2 years, you're extending it to 5 years upon request.
Upon request, or like I said, if it's encumbered, then you do not need to extend it because the funds have been.
Okay, so departments would have to get your approval to extend.
Yes.
So you heard that, so if you had a project and it might have lapsed, talk to him now before he gets his budget. Okay, thank you. Get other questions? Any other questions for the members? Wait, who's that up there?
Michelle?
Yeah, no, I see somebody raising their hand. at that
Michelle?
end. No, it's not Michelle.
Oh, Cheryl,
Oh,
Cheryl Parks.
Cheryl Kakazu Park.
No, I asked if members had questions.
No, no, I'm just answering your question. Who's that?
Oh, do you have a question?
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question. You know, for the audit, that's under your department.
Yes.
So if I wanted to have like, or wanted to see an audit on a certain department, what is the procedure would be? Because I've never seen an audit in the recent, I mean, you know, how we go to most of the departments, all of them, like you guys give an audit and the other guys had audits on some of the department. I noticed when, if I wasn't looking good, but I noticed for Hawaiian Home, then, they never had a recent audit.
No, that's,
Yeah, so there's two kinds of audits. There's the Office of the Auditor, which is governed by the legislature. And then there's DAG's audit, which we have that manage DAG's type projects. Yeah. So DHHL would most likely fall under the Office of the Auditor.
Office of the audit.
wait, Chris, you had something you wanted to add?
I was just going to comment on your question about the encumbrance of funds due to COVID-19. I believe you're referring to Comptroller's memorandum that was issued this past year. It didn't extend the lapse date, but what it did was afford more methodologies for agencies to encumber funds by the June 30, 2020. So in that way, many of us were able to preserve a lot of projects. And I thought that's what your question was leading
Or
towards.
is that the question?
Well, there's certain projects I think that are not, they haven't been released yet, that people are looking to get it released.
Can I ask about one particular project?
Which department
Okay.
though?
Who does the improvements, if need, for the courthouses?
That's,
Okay, Kauai. I understand that there's some problems with the roof and other areas. Now, if I remember, that was built before the Hilo courthouse. So why are we having those kinds of problems? And if the contractor who built that, because when was it built? The early 2000, right? Yeah, so is the contractor liable as well for the work that's going on? And I understand, as an example, the roof, I heard, is not an issue, but they're redoing the roof as well as some of the other areas, no problem, but they're doing work. So what's the real problem? And I'm hearing this from a contractor that's working on the project.
I don't know if it's Chris that can answer that, or if it's Eric again from.
And later on, you can
Yeah, if not, you
report
can-
to the chair.
yeah, if not, if you don't have an answer now, you can just follow up. Okay, Senator Kidani?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to follow up with Chris on the Capital District project. Is there a consultant on this project? And how long has that consultant been working on this project?
We do have Architects Hawaii working with us on our statewide and capital district master plans. They've been with us for possibly, I think, 5 years, primarily because our efforts in this area have been extended. We have gone through several iterations on our space requirements, and some of that even goes back to the question earlier about PSD feeling overcrowded in the Keoneana building. It's because our space master plan allocation has changed as of 2017. In trying to optimize our space, we went from an average of 200 square feet per person down to roughly 48 square feet per person. And so that's what we're working with. But Architects Hawaii continues to follow through all the different iterations and our efforts to optimize all the work. the master plan itself, the concept on going through, for example, at one time we were going to renovate Kamamalu and move the Department of Health out of Kinauhale into Kamamalu, demolish Kinauhale, rebuild that, and then move people out of Clean Little Kalani building, demolish that building and rebuild that. Those efforts require a lot of investment and the domino effect of moving staff through the space. That initiative or that window closed when we move other entities into the Kamamalu building. So now we're looking at other ways of trying to optimize the space. And that's our ongoing efforts.
So is this all the same consultant doing this? Space planning, et cetera?
Predominantly.
Yeah,
I think it was predominantly architects.
So wouldn't they know how much people in PSD needs to fit in the building? And if it's overcrowded, then isn't it on them? I don't understand. And how many times have we had to do change orders? I mean, what's it costing us to do all this?
So that type of determination on the space authorization is completely internal to DEC and not dependent on the consultant.
So it's
Yes. So what the requirements do is we really look at the actual authorized number of employees for each program that enters into our building. So every time the agency reorganizes and changes their programs, we have to go back through it again. And that's really what's happening even within PSD. So that's been our challenge, that every year we are dealing with new program requirements and having to shuffle all that to assign the appropriate amount of space. And so that's not a consultant thing, that's internal to our processes. And as we said, trying to optimize all the space has been a big challenge for our team. And we have very little funding to go through the overall master planning effort to do that.
okay. Well, can you answer my question about the cost and the change orders? What was the original cost of the contract and how many change orders? What's the total cost to date?
I think it's probably better served if I just respond separately, and I'll give you the details on the original contract and how that's migrated over time, because the original master plan was completed, but we've extended those services for additional iterations. But I'd be happy to give you that detail in writing if you so.
Yeah, if you can send it to the chair. But I guess what we're probably looking at then now is another reiteration, because I'm sure that all agencies will be looking at teleworking, now that we've been doing this almost a year. And so how does that fit into the plans of building use? Because now we don't need as much space. You're not going to need as much space as previously. So I'm just concerned that if we keep, going with this contract and extending it and doing change orders, the master plan itself has probably changed, and it's going to continue to change. But 5 years on a contract is kind of long, and I don't want to see this, in another 2 years and asking for this thing, money.
I can't share with you information on that. When you talk about the Civic Center Master Plan, that was a complete report and it was done. The iterations we're talking about now with people teleworking and perhaps a space required in the buildings, again, that's internal to DAGS. And while we can do all of the calculations for the space required, what then we need consultant services for is to actually look at how do we renovate buildings to optimize that space, because all of these different offices will not fit in the buildings as exactly laid out. So that's when we end up extending their contract to do additional detailed design, for example, renovation and assignment. So that, again, is not a function of the master plan so much as a function of renovating our state office buildings in order to optimize. And that, again, we start generating internal DAGs on our master plan of how we can consolidate programs, and then it would come as a request for funding to do the actual planning and design and construction for renovating the buildings.
Yes, again, I understand that, Chris, but and I don't know if you need to kick this to a high level. Maybe Kurt needs to get involved, or the deputy. you can only fit so many people in a room or in a building, and I think you guys know the floor space, that's what the consultant does, but, you know, if you're trying to move a department in there that isn't going to fit, then, you know, the plans don't work from the beginning.
Yes,
So-
and that's internal efforts. That's internal to our efforts. But we'll definitely get you the contact information, Senator.
Thank you.
Just to add on to that, just in terms of public works and the buildings that we do own, have we done that kind of assessment of all our buildings? Because I think we're growing and shrinking, you know, to be able to have an assessment on all our state-owned buildings.
Yes, DAGS has done an annual survey, and what Senator Kidani is referring to is a survey that is long overdue to her. The process in which we have asked departments to provide vacant space is not working. And we've tried under my tenure 3 times, and it still doesn't work. And nobody wants to give up space. And so what I believe we're going to be doing is, and I talked to Deputy Comptroller Hidano, is the only way to do this is to physically walk the floors of the buildings that we identify the space. There's space that are absolutely being crowded. There's other space that's being wasted because of storage. There's other space that is too big, but nobody wants to give it up. So this is the hard part.
Just going to Capital One, when you walk in there, you see all kinds of storage.
Right. So now's the time to, as I said, be a little non-traditional. It's not a popular thing to take away space, especially during COVID. But as I've had the opportunity to go to neighbor islands when we did travel last year, you can clearly see that some departments can clean it up as storage. But it's going to take that kind of independent and personality to go in, and the deputy can absolutely assist me in going through that. You got to walk the floors.
Yeah.
That's what it takes.
Especially if you're digitizing now, you don't need all the paper and all the stuff that's.
But in fairness,
I mean, there's probably lots of trash.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I will
Old
also tell you that my
furniture.
colleagues are well aware of this. They're aware that they need to look at, is teleworking permanent? And in some cases, we've had the luxury of 10 months, 11 months now to see if this works or not. We're still
But
catching
some
the
buildings are
strides.
really just not safe. I mean, we went to the Department of Health,
Department of Health, that was.
and it was the opposite, where you just had so many people in a crammed space. They were surrounded, it was just their little desk, and they were surrounded by filing cabinets.
It's unhealthy.
So we're going through this right now with the Attorney General's office. We're relocating one of her departments from a private building in downtown to Kalanimoku in a like space, but they don't have the defined walls and offices that they once had. So now we're negotiating to see, because there's going to be a cost to building walls and offices, and do we really need to do that?
Or
to fit in the
cubicles.
budget?
Yeah, cubicles, they have that.
Right.
You know.
So that's what I mean. It's going to take that kind of dialogue and working with everybody to come together. And
So what's the timeline for you and Audrey to do this?
well, we just started talking about this because we looked at our leases. We have I can't remember how many leases. 100
But even
some
not
odd.
just the leases, because this might help us it's cheaper for us to probably retrofit some of these buildings than it is for us to build and because you look at, for instance, Shipti in Hilo, right? The thing is falling apart. I know DLNR is going to build a new building.
With the university campus.
So some of these things might have a different outcome knowing the results of your guys' review and almost audit of the space.
Yeah, I will work with Deputy to come up with a priority list. We got to start somewhere, and we do need to start.
These buildings should be for people, not for storage.
Except,
These are
no, not
public-
necessarily, not necessarily. Because if it's like things like historic preservation, you know, with their archives, there are certain things that you have to store
Exactly.
Yeah.
and that they need to be stored. So that was the problem with Shipti, is you had all this sensitive material and rain is coming in, you know, old historic documents are now getting, there was mildew on it when we went to look at it.
they're all paper up.
And so it just depends, and you know, that's why I think their audit is probably really important, because when they go in and actually physically see it,
And it's not a,
and I'm sure your new government ops chair is going to go with you.
I'm sure. But it's not like it's adversarial. For example, the Bureau of Conveyances in our own building will say that they have space, they have old records, some you want to preserve, but maybe there's a better place to store them. in-state archives.
Storage.
So some is accessibility, some
Something more
is
secure too, yeah?
so everyone is open to looking at things. We just have to come together and collaborate and not be just silo. Everybody has their own space and do with it. So I see that as a priority.
I just want to shift one more question onto Aloha Stadium. So you're paying G funds for them for just 1 year, or how, what is the agreement
A
there?
funds, A funds.
A funds for Aloha Stadium, and are you going to use any part of the stadium? I know you're using the parking lot, but what is the future of that for the biennium? I just see for 1 year.
Well, Manager Scott Chan can answer better than I, but I will tell you that the stadium is special funded, as you know, and so whatever events that they generate and earn revenue on is what is done to pay expenses. And so with no events, their special fund continues to deplete.
But they're using the parking lot to some extent.
Yes.
Is there any part of the stadium that can be used, and what is kind of the timeline for that?
Well, they did, right? They sponsored University of Hawaii games. It didn't generate any revenue because they don't pay rent. They will host the Hula Bowl and maybe make a modest sum there. But you need people in the stands, and you need concessions operating and things like that, and ticket sales and advertising. That's a big part of it. So without all of those components, it makes it very challenging for the stadium to do that. But, Scott Chan from Stadium Authority, would you like to address Senator's question?
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, chairs. Morning, vice chairs and committee members. Happy New Year. My name is Scott Chan. I represent the Stadium Authority, AGS 889, and I also have here present to help answer any questions. To my left, I have Deputy Manager Ryan Andrews and our Administrative Services Officer Russell Uchida to my right. Now, Chair Morawaki, I could hardly hear your question, but I'll try and answer what I did hear. You know, you know that our program is event driven. Without the ability to bring in large events, it has a direct impact to our program's budget. You know, we've been doing our best to be innovative and creative, to bring in events or using other inventory areas that we can maximize, which is the parking lot. And if you've noticed in the past few months, you know, we've had several drive-through events. We've had the Trunk and Treat, the Halloween Haunted House, Christmas lights. We've also had the rented car rescue that we provided and made a substantial amount of money. But all these events that we have are very little in terms of what we actually need. I really don't need 6 figures. I need 7 figures to run our operations. And the fact of the matter is, the key points to our request is we need some reassurance to finish off fiscal year 221, and we need a large capital, working capital to us to start the fiscal year 222. Now, without any assistance and the concern of the unpredictable future, I don't know any other resort but to shut down operations, and I don't know if that is a decision that we want to make. It's just very difficult. We continue to work through our worksheets. If you take a look at our worksheets, we project our cash balance being depleted by the end of this fiscal year, and that's again being looked at on a daily basis. We have a deficit of $3.89 million that needs to be fulfilled, and our cash balance will be depleted at the end of this fiscal year. So I wish I had a better answer to provide, but that's where we are right now. And I can tell you that, and you already know this, the stadium has been self-sufficient for since we opened up in 1975. And that's pretty amazing. It's just, we're at a point where we've got, after 45 years, we need to come in and ask for some support because of the pandemic that we've gone through the last 9 months. That has a direct impact to our budget. and we're doing our best to try to stay afloat. And if it weren't for that, reasonable or excellent year we had in 2019 with a string of major concerts, the NFL football game between the Rams and Dallas Cowboys, and bringing back the monster trucks after 25 years of absence, our cash balance would be depleted as we speak today, right now. So that's been carrying us for the last 9 months. So we are concerned about our program, and we are respectfully asking for your support.
I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, are you keeping all your 30 staff, or how are you, the 2.8 million, is that to bring down the deficit, or is that also for staffing, or what are the costs of the 2.8 million, which is?
Thank you for this, Senator. It is to address our overall program. Now, the future is still unpredictable. I mean, if we are required to continue operating the way we do under these circumstances, we will require the majority of our staff. But we've been tasked by the state authority to skinny up in terms of the terms that they're using, and to look at worst case scenarios for us to carry out our program without receiving any kind of cash infusion or financial assistance, to see what we need to do to make sure that we can continue to function. And that is a consideration, and that is something that we're evaluating as we continue to move forward. It's just still fluid. I mean, to share at this point in terms of what we plan to do with our staff.
So the 2.8 million is just for fiscal year 22, and not for the following year. So this is looking at the pandemic, the vaccine pretty much coming into play so that you can start your activities again. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. I mean, if that is the direction we take, there's definitely a lot more that needs to be considered in regards to our facility. So, I think there's a couple key issues here is we need to look at the NASIP project. I mean, where does it fall in line in terms of timing? And how we can best utilize our funding, our state funding. And, that's a key for us to move forward with this current facility, or just start looking forward to the new facility. And I think, that would be in our best interest. The sooner we can get the new facility up and running, the quicker the return on investment for everyone in the entire state.
So this $3.8 million deficit, what is that? And is that in terms of operations, in terms of building, and where is that cost, the deficit from?
That is an overall operation item, and maybe I could have our administrative service officer explain that in a little bit more detail. If you can share a little bit more thoughts on that.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committees. Russell Uchida, Administrative Services Officer for the Aloha Stadium. Going back to your, to elaborate on Manager Chan's response, the 2.587 is to cover fiscal year 2022 only. Our plan is to hopefully receive the 1.5 million emergency appropriation, and that will allow us to cover whatever shortfall we have in this fiscal year, with the residual carrying over into the next fiscal year 2022 to allow us to have working capital to start the next fiscal year. That should last us approximately 3 months or so into the next fiscal year, at which point our plan is to hopefully have, with the legislature's concurrence, the 2.587 kick in, which will allow us to carry us for another 5.5 months or so. This may or may not complete the year depending on projections, because we have started our projections back in March, and we continue to refine and I guess make adjustments to our budget so that we can survive for as long as we can on the cash that we have. Also, in the next legislative session, it is our plan and hope, if we're going to look at falling short, we're going to come back in with another request to help us complete the year or carry us for another 12 months after that.
So
The 3.87, I'm sorry, the 3.89 million shortfall is based on revenues minus expenditures, 3.89 million, then offsetting that 3.89 million by the amount of cash we have on hand this fiscal year. So the net effect that we're projecting is approximately 150,000 at the end of the fiscal year. Shortfall at the end of the fiscal year. The caveat and the concern that we have is that, you know, we're building this projection worksheet based on assumptions, much of which, you know, nobody really knows for sure how it's going to turn out, whether the economy is going to turn for the better or for the worse. So we need to make sure that we have enough money to complete the year in case the economy turns for the worse.
So
I
there-
hope that answers your
so-
question.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I hope so. So if the economy starts coming back, if we get people starting to use the stadium again, the stadium is usable so that you can get back in business as soon as you can get events to congregate together? Or is that something that's in the offing that you're closed, or what is the projection going out on that?
One of our main concerns is going to be the cost involved with COVID-19 and what's going to be required to bring the stadium back up to snuff, I guess, to allow for the crowd to once again enter into the stadium. I'd like to, you know, defer that response or elaborate on that response with either the manager or the...
Well, Senator, that's a difficult question to ask right now. I think that's a question for the experts to answer. I do know from the reports that we have that we have access to that the structure has been addressed. Now, the issue is during COVID, this facility has been sitting idle for over a year. You know, and there's a concern that there's minimal amount of maintenance that have been done, along with the necessary monitoring that needs to be taken care of to understand where we sit overall in order to entertain the thought of having fan occupancy back in our facility. That's the other request that we have in regards to a monitoring process that needs to be done as part of our request of the other budget requests out of the two.
So the budget does include maintenance so that you're not letting the facility stand idle so that, you know, we're not going to be able to use it at all even when the pandemic passes.
But it's been sitting idle, and I think that's the reason why I talked about the timelines and considering the NACIP project, how that actually plays into all the decisions that we need to make. You know, unfortunately, I can't answer all those questions right now. I mean, there's many assumptions floating out there, but the fact of the matter is we're trying to make the best appropriate decisions in terms of our budget moving forward in regards to the current facility and how we can segue and make the smooth transition to the new facility that in a project that we're working on.
So I guess what I maybe, you know, we're going too much into this, but maybe you could send us maybe your worksheet, or what are you spending the 2.8 million on?
No, just, if you can just send us a breakdown on that line item.
Yeah, one item.
Okay, Senator
Thank you.
Kidani?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask whether or not there have been have you guys looked at other uses for the stadium and looked at opportunities maybe to have someone else lease the property and maybe do some renovations with it for, you know, as part of a lease agreement? What are the other opportunities you have looked at, I guess is what I'm asking.
Parking lot.
But they're already using the park.
You have a master plan already.
Yeah, Manager Chan
Yeah,
can
good
answer.
morning, Chair. Good morning, Chairs, Vice Chairs, and committee members. I'm Ryan Andrews. I'm the Deputy Manager. And that's a great question, Senator. And our Stadium Authority Board did set up a subcommittee to look and to answer that exact question, to look at what other revenue opportunities are available on this property. And as a staff as well, we've been doing the same exercise. So we do have a number of ideas and concepts, but there's still some more work to do on that. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities with a property this large for all sorts of activities. So that is underway.
But it's been a year. You guys, when did you guys start looking at this? When did this idea
We've been looking at this since March, and we've actually implemented some of those ideas already. So as you've seen, we've done a number of drive-through activities, and we have a number actually planned for the future as well. Again, we're very limited right now on what we can and cannot do based on the various restrictions, and so we're trying to work within those guidelines as we move forward.
And we've also consistently stayed with search testing and food distributions. We've had a number of those that we have been trying to assist with other state agencies as well, besides just the program that we have to answer to currently.
Right, and I guess in my mind, being the chair of education, I think of all the seniors who graduated last year without, any kind of real ceremony because they couldn't find a place large enough that the stadium would have been really great, even if you had limited it only to parents or whatever, so at least they could have had a marching ceremony. But I'm not sure if that was ever offered or if anyone approached you guys. But, if we're still in this predicament, come May, June this year, it's something that we may want to look at to offer the school.
Thank you for that question, because we are meeting and coordinating an opportunity with all the high schools that we've been working with for graduation. So we are hoping that we can have something this year, of course modified under the pandemic guidelines that we have to abide by.
Thank you.
Okay, if no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Adjourn.
Thank you.